Mountain Blade Warband, a game about killing dudes. Lots of them. Well, okay, it's not just about killing dudes, it's also about politics as well. But yeah, mainly it's about killing dudes. You start off by making a character based on some simple story elements and a variety of beards. They're all presented in a summarized setting and generally speaking have no real effect on the story. You could choose to be the son or daughter of a noble warrior or of a bandit, even a nobleman. It doesn't really matter, and ideally it's just there to give you some starting stats. Depending on how you answer the questions, you could affect your character's starting privileges. Think of the game as a sandbox game set in medieval times. People who were poor didn't have much in the realm of land or anything like that, and if you choose to be the son of a noble, you might already have some advantages that other characters wouldn't, like being the lord of a fief or the ability to carry a banner representing your house. Any character can earn this privilege over time, however, and I think that many people would agree that building up your character is half the fun, so starting without those advantages and earning your way there is somewhat meaningful and fun. This game can easily be divided into 3 segments: fighting, questing, and politics. In fact, even most of these things go together in some way, so you're usually never doing just one thing. Throughout the game you'll fight, a lot, and there's a lot of different ways to fight. You could fight on horseback with bows and arrows, shields, axes, swords, throwing weapons, you name it. You could even fight in tournaments betting on yourself along the way to make some extra cash. Fight your way through non-allied war parties against bandits, in castle sieges. You could even duel under the right circumstances, though it's usually just for a lady or some other lord who didn't like that guy. Without a doubt, fighting is the game's best asset, and since you'll be doing it a lot, that's a good thing. Combat's influence is based on the skills you pour your points into. If you want to be good with two-handed weapons, put some points into it. If you want to be a wannabe legless, minus the ears, you could do that too. In fact, a lot of the game's fun comes from mastering different weapons and generally being a badass with them. You can also increase your ability to gain weapon levels easier, so when you use a specific weapon type, eventually you'll just get better with it. When you level up, there's a variety of abilities to put your points into that don't necessarily have to do with the combat. You can focus in training troops so that battle isn't as necessary to level them, pathfinding to travel faster. There's even a pure riding skill trait, and even things like persuasion. There's plenty of options, and it's all there so you can make the character you want. You can also recruit allies to your group who can also level, and you can put points into skills that you find less interesting on those characters. For example, I find that it's always good to have a doctor character with which your only focus is healing abilities so that you don't have to waste any of your own precious points. However, if you lose a battle, then they can be lost for a while, and you'll be without those abilities. But there's always a way to find those characters again. Actually, a good point to bring up is that if a character has a name in this world, he'll not likely be dying anytime soon. Even if your whole party is slaughtered, the worst that can happen is you'll lose most of your army, where your companions are, and maybe an item you had equipped. Oh, and some time because you'll be taken prisoner. It doesn't usually take very long for your character to escape from captivity, and then you're on your way again. The story in this game is shallow at best. You can even argue there really isn't a true story. This game presents you with a world that can change even without your help, and this provides for some interesting perspective. It means that you're creating your own story. You can help or hinder the inhabitants, influencing which kingdoms will prosper or fail, but ultimately things will play out in a pretty random fashion. Which is interesting because if you play this game, you'll have a totally different experience than I did. It makes your experience more personalized and overall, I'd say, better. Other than that, there are some pretty static characters, aka the lords, counts, and kings of Calradia. They all usually have a warlike personality, hating some specific other nation, but sometimes you'll find that some people just want peace. So it's kind of a black and white thing, but it's usually pretty easy to start getting some friendship points with anyone. My advice if you're looking to own land would be to get in good with at least 2 to 3 lords of the faction you are fighting for, especially the king, because when new lands are conquered there will be a vote as to whom receives the towns, castles, or fiefs, and you can influence people's votes easily if you're already friends with them, which means it'll be easier for you to get the land. Plus I swear most of the time whoever the king votes for is usually the one who gets it. Of course that is all dependent on if the king proclaims it should be his or not, because if he does want it then usually the other lords will support him as to not strain their friendship with him, and you can say goodbye to that land. One of the ways to greatly increase your odds at getting the land would be to conquer it yourself. Unless you've recently received a property, you'll likely be getting it in the long run. Land is definitely a thing that should be a priority because then you can start making revenue on a weekly basis from taxes, rather than having to fight and loot all that money. Eventually you'll need all that money just to pay for the soldiers you'll have in your party or garrisoned at castles, because your units will also level up over time and will start to cost more. For a small fee you can upgrade their equipment and abilities, making your army that much more efficient, but the more upgraded units you have, the more you'll need to pay in wages, so there is balance to be had. Countries you're at war with will send raiding parties to loot and pillage your villages if you're not careful, and generally speaking, your first piece of land will probably be the hardest to defend, making for some difficult situations in a bit of a harder earlier game than later game. I find that it's always good to have a fast travel unit in these cases so that you can make your way across the map faster. These units are made up of about 20 to 30 horsemen because they'll be able to travel at faster speeds on the world map, and therefore you can go to the aid of villages under your control. There isn't really a huge downside to letting them get pillaged, aside from the non-usage of the village, and of course its inhabitants won't be able to pay you taxes if they're dead, but sometimes you just won't have the ability to reach them fast enough. Eventually they'll come back and resume all the normal activities though. On the topic of a harder earlier game, I merely meant that your character is much weaker than he will be later on. As you progress and gain reputation, things will come a bit easier. You'll become a pretty skilled combatant, almost regardless of how you level, being able to take on lots of soldiers on your own. Your reputation will get you things easier, like more troops when you recruit from villages, or even stronger variations and even new lands. However, there will be drastic changes throughout the game of which I could only predict. Whole factions may be wiped out. You may even eventually defect and create your own kingdom, which is not a simple task because many of the other lords will go to war with you immediately because you are not the rightful king, or however they justify it. So in the end, I would say the game is pretty well balanced. You can even adjust difficulty levels to make battles easier or harder depending, but overall actions will have consequences or benefits. As I've said, there really isn't much of a story, and quite frankly there isn't much variation in the quests you'll be receiving either. I can't really stress enough that your experience will differ from my own. But I think objectively speaking, the lack of quest variation and stories to undertake is somewhat of a downer. The gameplay, however, even with the lack of variety in questing, still is really solid. You'll find yourself fighting a lot, which is easily the game's strongest asset and they know it. So you'll be able to look past a lot of the flaws because you'll be enjoying so much of what is the true gameplay. The game mechanics are good all around. There are a few minor glitches still remaining, like some minor graphical issues, but nothing to truly delve into. The fighting animations are also good, and maneuverability takes some getting used to, but still works. Also, the physics of the fighting is really quite unique. It takes into account where the weapons hit, the speed at which you were traveling, and where you hit them in the animation, which means you'll do less or more damage depending on how well you master your maneuverability and fighting capabilities. If you've been watching this video, then you probably know that the graphics aren't something to write home about. The graphics look a bit dated and could use a little bit more polish. The music sets the mood for this game well, however it does tend to loop quite a bit, and if you've been playing the game for a long time then you might find yourself a little uneasy having heard the same loop more than a handful of times. That doesn't mean the tracks aren't good, it just means that they should probably have more in the next installment. So as you can see, Mount & Blade is definitely a play. Give the demo a shot and I doubt you'll want to stop playing. It's just one of those games that never truly ends without having poured hundreds of hours into it, and at that point I'd probably say you'd be tired of the game anyways. But the game stands pretty well as it is. If you can't look past some of the minor flaws of the game, like the graphics or the somewhat repetitive questing, then you probably won't enjoy this game. But for those of us that don't care about pushing through a few rough edges, the game will definitely reward you. Hey guys, thanks for watching my video. Leave a comment down below. I'm actually really interested to see what you guys thought or how you guys felt about the game if you've played it. Yeah. Also, be sure to check out my previous two videos on the top 10 games within other games and the top 10 SNES songs of all time. Remember, these are just opinions, but you know, yeah. You should go check those out too. That'd be cool. Well, it would make me happy. Well, I wouldn't be unhappy.